Hello everyone, Thersites here. Welcome back to WTFGAS podcast, the place where we talk about the things that don't necessarily matter too much, but hopefully are of some entertainment value. Today we are tier ranking Adam Sandler feature films. I've excluded movies where he was merely a supporting actor, so we won't see Shakes the Clown on here, or any of the Happy Madison productions where he just did a voice here or there that didn't go credited. So, we're just looking at films where he was either one of the main actors or the main protagonist. And in fact, by doing this, we've come up with 41 films. I actually made a slight mistake when I was making this tier list, however. There should be 42 films. I forgot to include Hotel Transylvania 3, but that's okay because I've never seen it, so I can't really rank it anyway. And because I'm not a big fan of children's movies, I'm content to leave it that way. The reason I decided to do Adam Sandler films is that, one, I was looking at his IMDb recently and I realized that I've seen most of them, so I'd only really need to watch a couple of movies and then I'd be ready to look at more or less the entire corpus of Sandler's career. The other thing that I realized is that there are plenty of other people who have done this before. And what's interesting about Sandler movies is that they tend to create wildly variant reactions. There are 5 or 6 movies that he's made that most people absolutely despise, but if you look at any individual's take on those despised movies, there's always someone who will look at one of those and say, you know what, I actually really like this one. I think that people don't get it. And when it comes to Adam Sandler's more serious movies, all of them are interesting. And there are some people who think that he's a brilliant actor. Or people who, like me, think that he's a talented actor who was just lazy. And that he rarely does good work, but he's capable of it. He normally just prefers to do that weird voice and turn out schlock with his friends. Nonetheless, those are my general thoughts on Sandler, but we'll get more into depth as we go through all of these various films. His first foray into the world of movies, I think this was before he did SNL. This was Going Overboard from 1989. Adam Sandler was very young at the time, maybe about 23-ish, and his inexperience is obvious. Apparently this was an independent film or semi-independent film that he made with his friends. The only exposure he had up to this point is that he had been some sort of character on The Cosby Show at one point. And this movie was made with very little budget. It's very self-aware. He actually at one point says that, yes, it's just an independent film. We have no money. Go easy on us, or something to that effect. The premise is that he is on a cruise ship and he's sort of an understudy to a comedian. I think he's actually a cook, but he dreams of being the cruise ship comedian. And the guy who is the cruise ship comedian is sort of a stereotypical douche 80s comic who's kind of crass and rude and not very funny. So Adam dreams of replacing him and going on to get a bunch of chicks by being the cool comedian on the cruise ship. The premise itself is weak, but it's not unworkable. The problem is that there aren't any funny people or jokes in the movie. And the plot really drags. This one is hard to watch. When I first discovered Adam Sandler and I knew about movies such as Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore, I was really into those because those were sort of designed for my age demo. Basically, boys who liked fart jokes and stuff like that. Then I watched Going Overboard, and even as someone who was still in that age bracket, I was maybe 12 by the time I got around to seeing Going Overboard. I found it at Blockbuster or somewhere. I gotta say, that one was shit, and I knew it was shit from the first time that I saw it. This movie's an F, and I really wanted to rank this one a little higher just out of respect for the fact that he was trying to make an independent film and that he and his friends clearly put a lot of effort and probably personal money into it. But the movie is barely watchable, and it's so bad it's not even really a bad movie candidate because it's a little too boring. It's got some cringe in it, but it's sort of a self-aware cringe where they know they're making shit and it's just a resume patter and it's not that interesting. So, pretty bad. After this, he was in a couple of other movies, Shakes the Clown and Coneheads, but those were in relatively minor supporting roles. In Shakes the Clown, he plays Dink, and he's basically one of the best friends of the main character, Bobcat Goldthwait, who plays Shakes the Clown. That's definitely more about Bobcat. That movie's a whole thing. That movie's really out there. I watched it in preparation for this, but I didn't count it for the list because it's not really an Adam Sandler movie, but worth watching if you're interested in a really offbeat 90s comedy. Another one he appeared in was Coneheads, but again, he was not major enough. Around the same time, the early 90s, he was on SNL. He was gaining in national fame. And then he and a couple of his friends appeared in the film Airhead. He appears alongside of Brendan Fraser, Steve Buscemi, and this is effectively a movie about three guys in what's supposed to be a metal band, but is probably really more of a punk band, and they're desperate to get an opportunity, and they know that if people just have a chance to hear their music, that people will fall in love with what they have to offer, and that they will be a huge success. So they end up in a comedy of errors where they end up more or less creating a massive hostage standoff. And yeah, in many ways, this is kind of a send-up of the concept of Wayne's World to an extent, just taken a little further. Adam himself is actually decent in this movie. He plays the straight man, believe it or not. So instead of doing the voice and the weird persona, he just kind of is somewhat slow-witted, unobservant drummer, and then Steve Buscemi and Brendan Fraser are much more high-strung and more dominant. So he's, in some ways, Adam Sandler is playing something like a Ringo Starr stereotype, if that makes sense. And because he plays the straight man to their extreme personalities, it's actually kind of funny and ends up having a lot of the better jokes. This movie's not a masterpiece, but I think it's actually underrated. A lot of people say it's a real piece of shit, but I would say it's pretty average. It represents its subject well. It shows some love for alternative music scene, and I would say it's about a C. There are definitely worse films where Adam Sandler has a major role, so if you had to watch one of them, this one wouldn't hurt too bad, and you'll actually laugh a few times. So yeah, that would be my opinion of Airheads. After that, he appeared in Mixed Nuts. This was the last time, to the best of my knowledge, where he appears as a small character. After this point, he's basically always a lead character. This movie's called Mixed Nuts, and it stars Steve Martin. And like I said, after that point, for the most part, unless he's doing uncredited voices here or there, Adam Sandler is almost always the lead in every other movie he appears in. That's partly because, as we'll talk about, he founds Happy Madison and more or less has creative control of pretty much everything he does. But the movie that really made Adam Sandler a star, which put him on the map, is without a doubt Billy Madison. This movie is very quotable. He also uses his man-child persona, and this is probably the time where his man-child persona is both at full blast, but also worked in a situation where the man-child makes sense. In the 90s, comedy tended to be zanier, so this really went over well. He had established cred for this zany character on SNL. And then in the movie, the character Billy Madison is a rich kid who was a hotel heir and had grown up with everything kind of handed to him. He'd never really had to grow up or take responsibility. So him being a man-child at the age of 27 kind of actually makes sense. There's some limited logic. And in comedies, there does need to be some limited logic. It doesn't have to make full sense, but there has to be at least some minimal plausibility to all the zaniness. And if you're going to have a man-child, making him rich kind of helps to sell that to some extent. He has to go through all of the grades in a week or two apiece to try to prove to his dad that he could get through high school without cheating. So he buckles down to try to become the heir to this hotel chain. And there are a lot of great moments in this movie. He has some funny interactions with a bus driver. He goes to some historical town, and the lady says, if peeing your pants is cool, then consider me Miles Davis. Then there's the dog shit incident. There is O'Doyle Rules, which pretty much appears in every other weird goofy movie that he does, including the most recent one, Hubie Halloween, which came out a couple months ago. Steve Buscemi's here in a minor role. There's the infamous scene where he faces off against a bad guy, and they have a trivia bowl type of competition. And then there's that famous line where the principal says, "Mr. Madison, in your insane, rambling, incoherent response, I found nothing of value. We're all dumber for having listened. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul." It was great. I have to give it an S. I think that this is one of the kind of representative movies of the 90s decade. It's held up reasonably well. I mean, obviously, a lot of it's dated now. And unfortunately, I think that if you are aware of a lot of Sandler's later work where he tries to do this but does it much more shittily, then it kind of diminishes the value of this. But if you view this in the context of when it came out in 1995, I think you can really appreciate it for what it was. And you also have to understand that this movie is very much very much aimed at sort of boys between maybe about the ages of 10 and 15 or so. I mean, that was really the target demo. And if you're much older or younger than that, this probably wasn't going to fly for you. I've also noticed that most women are not big fans of Billy Madison, so this does have some limited appeal. Nonetheless, very good movie, and this made possible everything that followed, more or less, which is unfortunate in some ways. The other movie which really put Adam Sandler on the map was Happy Gilmore from the following year, 1996. So actually, if anything, despite the fact that his career has been continuous to the present, the peak was without a doubt 1995-1996. Happy Gilmore, some people would argue, and I think I would be among them, that Happy Gilmore is actually a little better than Billy Madison. In this movie, you have a great bad guy, Shooter McGavin, although Billy Madison also had a pretty good bad guy. You have the appearance of that guy, Richard Kiel, who played Jaws in the old Bond movies. He plays Adam Sandler's character, former boss. The movie, in many ways, prefigures those Will Ferrell comedies from the aughts where he would do some fringe sport, figure skating or NASCAR or what have you. And also, I guess there is the dodgeball movie with Ben Stiller and Vince Vaughn. This is basically taking a sport that most people don't really understand or get and then parodying and making a parody of it. Happy Gilmore in this is kind of a man-child, but less so than Billy Madison. He's kind of a blue-collar guy who dreams of making it on the professional hockey team, even though he's pushing 30 at this point. And aside from some hustle, he's really not that great of a hockey player. He randomly discovers that he has a natural talent for golf because he can hit the shit out of the ball. And this will become another trope of Adam Sandler movies. He's inexplicably strong for some reason. When he punches people, they always go down in one hit, even though he's no bigger than they are and he has never received any training or whatever. So, this is the introduction of a renowned Sandler trope. But at this point, it was funny. Later on, it becomes a little tiresome, especially as he's clearly older and less athletic. Bob Barker has a famous scene in this where he gets in a fight with Adam Sandler's character. It's pretty great. There is the trainer who lost his hand to an alligator. There's a lot of memorable stuff here. And this one is also pretty out there, very much a product of its time, but I think still funny to this day. So Happy Gilmore, which is half of the Happy Madison production name, is also an S tier. Also that same year, 1996, Adam Sandler had another movie come out, Bulletproof. This was an action comedy, but unfortunately it kind of sucked at both. There's not much to say about this movie. I was not a fan. Adam Sandler is not funny in this. The other guy isn't very badass. Pretty forgettable. I give this one an E. The Wedding Singer, 1998. This is another one of the sort of Adam Sandler classics, part of the canon of Sandler, if you will. In this one, he plays a wedding singer, as the title implies. He's kind of a guy who has no luck in love. He's becoming disillusioned. And the movie itself is a bit of a timepiece. It's set in, or a period piece. A timepiece would be a watch, obviously. A period piece set in the 1980s. So it makes fun of a lot of the fashion and hairstyles and all that. By this point, there's no 80s nostalgia, but there is sort of a feeling of, God, the 80s were so lame. And this cashes in on that to some extent. It has a little bit of, I guess what you would call saccharine sweetness to it. And there are twinges of that in Happy Gilmore when Adam Sandler's character is trying to save his grandmother's house. But this becomes a little more prominent in The Wedding Singer, and that will become another major underlying characteristic of most future Sandler movies. So, Wedding Singer overall, interesting. It's not quite as memorable. Also, as I mentioned earlier, something like Billy Madison doesn't tend to get a lot of women fans. The Wedding Singer for women who watch Sandler movies is probably the sort of default choice. I think I will go with an A for Wedding Singer. So there you go. Next up is The Waterboy from 1998, Bobby Boucher. I remember this movie, but that does not make it good. I personally found this movie kind of obnoxious. This was the origin of the Rob Schneider "You Can Do It," where he's randomly dressed up as a Mexican. He has been doing that bullshit for the last 20 years. It was a little bit funny at first, but I have to admit, most of my classmates found it a lot funnier than I did. I kind of got sick of it after I saw it 8 times or whatever, because back then that kind of stuff was really popular. The premise is that there's this guy who's an equipment manager at some university in the Deep South. He becomes obsessed with the foosball and wants to become a football star. So it's kind of a sports movie that is sort of a parody of sports movies, and I can appreciate what they're going for, but it's a lot of the weird voice, the man-child thing, and then making fun of the Deep South. It only goes so far. I think it's kind of a D. A little below average, has a few laughs, but for the most part, it's a little zany for my taste without having some of the heart or quippiness of his better works. Next up is Big Daddy. This is one that I liked better when it first came out in 1999 than I've liked in subsequent viewings, and I've probably only seen this maybe twice overall, once when it first came out, and then maybe about 10 or so years later. This is one where he's trying to impress a woman by showing that he's responsible, and to show he's responsible, he takes on the task of raising a small boy. As you can see from the cover here, at one point he and the boy pee on the side of a building, and this is somewhere in New York or something like that, so this is clearly a bad decision, and the joke is that, of course, he's terrible at parenting just like he is everything else. But because it's an Adam Sandler film, he still manages to win over the girl because apparently he's got a heart of gold even though he's an idiot and a loser. Which, again, is basically the underlying message of every Adam Sandler movie. This one has a few memorable moments, but for the most part, it's pretty forgettable. And I think of all his movies, this is the one I feel is the most overrated. A lot of people cite this one as one of his better works. I don't see it. That's why I haven't revisited it much. For me, Big Daddy is a D. Next up is Little Nicky. This is one which is generally considered to be among the absolute worst of Sandler's offerings. And I think that the consensus opinion is 100% correct. Little Nicky is definitely an F. Let's talk a little more about it. In this one, he kind of does the voice, but he does a modified version, which is somehow even more annoying than usual. The character has like a crooked face or some shit. It's really awkward to look at. It attempts to make fun of kind of, I guess, satanic stereotypes. I don't know. Because Nikki and his family are all Satan's children. And it kind of tries to do something that I'm not really sure what they're going for. Keep in mind, this came out about the same time as Devil May Cry, the original, which was this really cool, stylish video game about someone who's the son of a demon. And then you got to compare it with this bunch of bullshit. There's nothing cool about Little Nikki. It's not funny at all. The effects are shit. The premise is shit. I barely remember any plot points. I can't remember a single line from the movie. It's one I only watched when it came out. At first, I'd heard good things about it at school. I was excited when I either went to go see it or rented it. And to say the least, I was very disappointed. This movie fucking sucked. Next up is Punch Drunk Love. So here we see the first indication that Adam Sandler can do something other than play a misunderstood but lovable man-child. In fact, Adam Sandler is a pretty skilled actor. He just normally chooses not to use those skills. In Punch Drunk Love, however, he very much does. You see character growth. It's a movie which is odd, but in a good way. It's kind of experimental, so the movie itself is pretty good. Adam Sandler's good in it. And the love story, unlike most Adam Sandler films, is fairly believable. The way it's shot looks a little different than most other movies. Clearly, the people making it had some artistic vision in mind. And Adam Sandler, whatever else he might be, is open to artistic interpretations in film. Because he either does total shit, which is just thrown together comedy, or he does things that clearly required a ton of effort and a ton of thought. And this is one of the latter examples. Punch Drunk Love is not quite a classic, but it is an interesting piece of film. And I rate it as a B. If you've never seen it, it's definitely worth watching. It'll be a little different than pretty much anything you've ever seen before. I would say it's pretty good, but not exactly life-changing, but still pretty neat. I cannot say the same about the next movie, Mr. Deeds, from 2002, the same year as Punch Drunk Love. Mr. Deeds apparently is a remake of some 1930s comedy. The premise is that he, Longfellow Deeds, has inherited a ton of money from some relative he never met, and now he's the master of a grand estate. People are coming for his money, and he doesn't really know what to do about it because he's kind of a clueless guy. And then he does some of his usual stuff. A lot of the jokes don't work. The butler and other people try to be super zany in the Adam Sandler style. It doesn't really work. This one is an F. I'm struggling to think of anything from this movie that was at all memorable or funny. Just kind of falls flat. Not really a lot to it. Next up is 8 Crazy Nights, which also came out in 2002. So he had nothing in 2001, then he has 3 movies in 2002. 8 Crazy Nights is an animated film about Hanukkah. And interestingly enough, this one is usually one of those 5 or 6 movies that people say is one of the worst things he's ever done. But personally, I actually really like this one. This one came out when I was in high school. I think I was probably about a sophomore in high school. And I remember seeing it when it first came out. I thought it was fucking hilarious. And to this day, I still laugh at it. There's a lot of it that's pretty immature. But nonetheless, I still find it funny. His character's kind of this loser who drinks a lot and is stuck in his hometown, and he has a series of misadventures. It makes fun of Christmas stories and musicals. I think it's well done, and it's one of the few times where Adam Sandler attempts to make a parody of something and actually pulls it off. So, one of the few times he goes for witty as opposed to zany and actually nails it, at least in my opinion. For me, 8 Crazy Nights is an A. Next up is Anger Management. Some people consider this to be among Adam Sandler's better movies. I don't remember much from this movie aside from the fact that Jack Nicholson slept in the same bed as Adam to piss him off at one point. This was about Adam Sandler learning to manage his anger so that way his girlfriend wouldn't leave him or something along those lines. I wasn't yet really a fan of Jack Nicholson because I didn't know about a lot of his work, especially One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I don't know if I was aware at the time that he had been the Joker from the old Michael Keaton Batman. Nonetheless, I didn't think that the general premise was good. By this point, I was old enough to know that that's not how therapy works. Your counselor doesn't follow you around. That would be a major violation of privacy, not to mention a huge risk to any mental health professional to follow around someone with known anger issues. That's just asking for trouble. The premise doesn't really work, and I didn't find it funny. I had to go with a D for anger management. Maybe there's something here that I'm missing that other people remember as being really good. I didn't see it. Next up is 50 First Dates. This movie came out in 2004. This is kind of at the intersection of Drew Barrymore becoming the new standard Adam Sandler love interest in pretty much every movie because she's one of the few women he has consistent chemistry with. And also, this has a lot of sappiness to it because she has some sort of memory condition where she forgets everything past a certain date every single morning when she wakes up because she had an accident a few years before he met her. But Adam Sandler and her character fall in love, and they figure a way around this memory problem and start a family and all that. So it's kind of sappy, and the premise is a little bit clever. Another cool thing that I like about it is that they don't find some miraculous healing mechanism here where all of a sudden her memory's fixed and then they live happily ever after. They have to work around this problem and they find ways to do it, even though both of them... I think he's some sort of research scientist, which is a weird role for him, but he actually kind of does it here and it's fine. So yeah, I kind of like it. It's not great, but it's pretty solid. I think 50 First Dates is a C. This is another one where women who watch Sandler movies will rank this one in probably their top 5. And the only reason I'm pointing out the gender differences and reception is because with Adam Sandler movies, the gender differences are super easy to predict. So, there you go. Next up is Spanglish. This movie is sort of an offbeat experimental drama, kind of like Punch Drunk Love, but not as good. In this one, Adam Sandler is a highly successful something or other, and his wife is a little high-strung, but she has some relatable qualities as well. He's got kids, and then they have a Spanish-speaking maid who presumably is an immigrant. At first, she doesn't know any English, and that's actually accurate to the actress's experience. At the time when she started, she had no or very little limited knowledge of English. And then she started taking ESL classes, and in the film, she starts learning English partly by talking with Adam's character. He's a little lonely because his wife and he are having problems. She's lonely because she's a stranger in a strange land. They bond and have an affair. Things don't really work out. So it's got a little tiny bit of tragedy. There's some romance. It shows some of the awkwardness of social relations, of someone and their maid having a relationship where the power dynamic is off. It brings up a lot of decent issues. And it's a smart film. The execution is a little wonky. The camera angles are not well thought out, I don't think. But it's not a bad film. I have to go with a C for Spanglish. It's also one that the concept outstrips the execution. So this is one where you have to watch it with a certain amount of patience because you have to realize that going in that there will be some things about it that you're not going to like. And as you're watching it, you'll be able to think of probably 10 or 20 things they could have done slightly differently, which would have made this a lot better. Nonetheless, it's not bad. It's just kind of average. Next up is The Longest Yard, another remake. The original had Burt Reynolds. It was a football movie where the prisoners play the guards, and the only thing at stake is just their personal pride and their feeling of humanity. In this remake, Burt Reynolds returns. This time he's more of the mentor or coach, and Adam Sandler fills the role of Burt Reynolds as the former football star who has to train the inmates and take them against the guards in a football game. He plays quarterback, of course, because he is the protagonist. And I think by this point, he's basically calling the shots in every movie he appears in. He had made a shit ton of money in box office, so he had a lot of pull. He probably also just wanted to work with Burt Reynolds, who, for someone like him who came of age in the 80s, Burt Reynolds was the fucking shit. So he just wanted to be with one of the heroes of his childhood. For someone of, say, my age group, you'd want someone like Dave Chappelle in your movie if you're going to make a movie, because Dave Chappelle was the shit when I was growing up. So it's kind of like that would be his Dave Chappelle cameo. Although it's not a cameo, it's actually a fairly substantial role. So anyway, Longest Yard, another sport-style movie. Of course, Adam Sandler in the movie is portrayed as a great athlete. I have no idea if he's actually athletic or not. I assume he must be somewhat athletic because he's done a lot of roles that have some physical acting in them. I remember it being okay, but I don't really remember too many specific moments. It's not really that funny, but it's also not quite serious. Terry Crews, I believe, is in it as one of the guards. And Terry Crews will then appear in a lot more Adam Sandler movies. I'm torn between a C and a D. I guess I will be generous and go with C. And it's decent. But because I can't remember it very well, it might actually be more of a D. I don't know. Next up is Click. Click came out in 2006. And this one is definitely sappy. It's all about Adam Sandler's character learning to love and appreciate his family more and to cherish the time that he has with them even when things aren't going as well as he'd like. He is some sort of wealthy, high-powered executive and he spends too much time at work. He eventually goes into some weird section of Bed Bath & Beyond, the so-called Beyond section, so it's just a little joke on the name of a store. And he gets a remote where he can fast forward through parts of his life. He somehow breaks it, and now his life is randomly fast forwarding, and he's blowing through his life really quickly and missing out on most of the really good moments he wanted to spend with his family. And it's okay. It's very sappy, but there are some funny parts, and I don't know if I'd say that he necessarily was really good at acting in this one, but he certainly wasn't bad. There wasn't a lot of the stupid voice. Some of the jokes were well done. There were at least some quippy one-liners. It's a little light in many ways, but I think it's a good family film in that sense of just talking about generic things like family. I actually think Click is a B. It's pretty decent, but not, I wouldn't call it truly special though. And it's also another one of those where you would need to be in the right mood to watch it to really enjoy it to its fullest potential. After Click, he did another movie which was a serious role, and that is Reign Over Me, 2007, where he worked alongside of Don Cheadle. The premise is that Adam Sandler's character is a guy who lost his wife and children in 9/11, and he's just kind of drifting. He and Don Cheadle's character had been dentists, but since 9/11, Adam Sandler's character's kind of just lost his focus, and he's more or less drifting through life. They reconnect after a fairly long absence from one another, and Don Cheadle takes it upon himself to try to reach out to him and bring him back from the brink. One thing that's really good about this movie is that while Adam's character makes progress from being suicidal to wanting to live, he never goes back to being joyful or whatever he had been before. He's still different. He's still changed. He's still affected by grief. But he's gotten through the storm. And then Don Cheadle, as a character trying to assist him, also has some flaws that are interesting. He doesn't know quite how to be a friend and guide at times. Sometimes he'll complain about his wife annoying him to a man who just lost his wife. So there's that. And also have to respect the fact that just 6 years after 9/11, where it's a very, very sensitive topic, they made a movie about 9/11. So for me, Reign Over Me is actually an A. This movie is good. Adam Sandler's character is believable. This one's a little on the heavier side emotionally, so this is one where it's not exactly a popcorn flick, but it is fairly well done for what it is. Next up is I Now Pronounce You, Chuck and Larry. This one tends to get panned, and a lot of people say it's one of the worst movies ever made. I think it's more mediocre. At the time in 2007 when this came out, or was it 2008? It's 2007. Gay marriage was actually still controversial. And in many ways, this is a pro-gay marriage movie. But actually, what it highlights is America's broken healthcare system. Kevin James's character, both of them are firefighters. Kevin James's character, however, is a widower, and he needs to make sure that if something were to happen to his family, that they would be taken care of. So he and Adam Sandler's character, who is a playboy in this, get married, or at least get a civil union, so that way, if something happens to Kevin James' character, Adam will get the kids and take care of them. And they also share benefits and all that kind of stuff. So it is very much a marriage of convenience in the truest sense. And it raises the issue of, well, if straight people are allowed to do this, and for these exact reasons, why can't people do it if they are of the same gender? Why can't these arrangements work in that way? And it's not really the smartest question in the world, but it at least is trying to get across a message of some kind. And along the way, they do have some laughs. So it's the premise of two very straight firefighters pretending to be gay and not really being all that convincing. And then they have somebody from some government bureau who's looking in on them. So that's all fairly funny. And it's really just not bad. I don't know why people hate it as much as they do. It's aged a little weirdly, and I guess now if you look at it, it seems slightly homophobic, but at the time it certainly wasn't. So I would give this one a C. It's alright. You can skip it. If you watch it, it's okay. But it's kind of there. Next up is one of the zanier comedies he did, You Don't Mess with the Zohan. Another thing I noticed about Sandler in the mid-2000s is that this is the point in his life where he's probably in the best shape, and he seems to have wanted to do what Chris Pratt did a little later and take his comedy career into action. Because he was pretty fit at this time, and I'm of the opinion, personally, that You Don't Mess with the Zohan was his attempt to see how he'd be taken as an action star. So this was a stab in the dark. This was a depth charge. The premise is he's an Israeli secret agent, thus beginning a very long string of movies where he really embraces his Jewish identity and talks about it a lot. Who gets bored with killing people, despite the fact that he's basically the best at what he does, and he wants to embrace his dream of becoming a hairdresser. What this movie's supposed to do is also make fun of action movies, kind of like Last Action Hero or Tracks to a certain extent, where you have a special forces guy whose dream is to become a cookie baker, like Famous Amos. So, the Zohan goes into hiding. He fakes his own death and then moves to New York to become a hairdresser. And then people find out who he actually is, and then a bunch of action scenes happen. And it's not horrible. I have seen other people list this one as one of his worst movies ever, but really it's just kind of meh. Some of the scenes you can laugh at because they're ridiculous, but it doesn't really work on either the action or the comedy front. So in many ways it's kind of like Bulletproof. But I'd say it's better than Bulletproof because at least it's trying to be a parody. And it does expose a few of the tropes of that sort of subgenre of movies about guys who want to get out of the business. So again, tracks, Last Action Hero, which themselves are kind of comedic. So it's kind of a spin of a spin. And I think it's a little too clever by half. And I have to give it a D. Nonetheless, so far as D-tier movies go, I actually think You Don't Mess with the Zohan is better than these previous three. Probably a hot take, but it's my channel and I can do what I want. So, fuck it. Also, I'm ranking these relative to Adam Sandler films. So if you're thinking that I'm saying that Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore are among the greatest films ever made, that is not quite what I'm saying. Just so you know, FYI. Okay. After You Don't Mess with the Zohan, there was Bedtime Stories, where he is talking to kids and telling a bunch of far-fetched stories. I don't remember this one well. I only saw it once. It was okay. But in general, I don't like kids' movies. At least kids' movies that came out after I was a kid. I just don't care. They don't have much to offer me. So it's hard for me to rank this one altogether fairly, but my sort of gut instinct here, which I'm just going to roll with, is that it's a D. Next up is Funny People from 2009. This tends to be one of his better regarded movies. A few people hate it, but a lot of people think that this is brilliant stuff. Adam Sandler's character, who is basically him, was diagnosed with an illness that would be fatal. He has a comedic understudy who's played by Seth Rogen, and the two of them do tours together where Seth Rogen's trying to absorb some of his comedic knowledge, and Adam Sandler's character is facing his mortal demise. Well, in the end, it turns out that whatever was wrong with him, he was misdiagnosed or the disease passed. I don't remember how it happened, but anyway, he learned he would live, and then he kind of went back on whatever limited progress he had made as a character and reverted to being kind of a dick. I have heard people try to make the argument that Adam Sandler was trying to make a deep commentary about how fame goes to people's heads and they forget their basic humanity and their mortality. I don't think this movie is that smart. And also, all the stand-up sets they do, none of the jokes are good. And Seth Rogen, who is a lot funnier than Adam Sandler in general, absolutely sucks ass in this movie. He's horrid. All the funny stuff that he's done in movies such as Pineapple Express and the Zack and Miri Make a Porno and The Disaster Artist, all the funny stuff he does in those kind of movies is not present here. He plays just a shit-tier comedian who's hanging out with somebody who's better at comedy in the hopes of becoming funny, of developing a sense of humor out of the ether. And I think that he was deliberately forced to play down his funniness so that way Adam Sandler's character looks funnier. But one thing Adam Sandler's never been good at is stand-up comedy. He can't do it. He doesn't have it in him. He can do songs and stuff, and some people will laugh at it. He can do skits, and he's pretty good at that because he's got a lot of energy and all that. And he can do movies because he has a movie studio. He developed that character that worked really well, made a shit ton of money. But he can't do stand-up. And this movie exposes that and makes it painfully clear. The word funny starts with F. Adam Sandler is not funny when he does stand-up, and so his movie about stand-up is an F. Just like his other movie about stand-up, Going Overboard, which was also absolutely terrible. Next up is Grown Ups, the first of two films about Adam Sandler and his childhood friends. These are not actually his childhood friends, these are his other comedian friends. This movie came out in 2010, and maybe on a certain level this was kind of a coming-of-age story, where the idea is we're all getting on in our careers now, and we should reflect on our lives. What decisions have we made in the world? I'm just kidding. It's not about any of that bullshit. It's just a bunch of comedians who wanted to be lazy, and the premise is if we get a bunch of comedians together, it has to be funny. I mean, obviously, look at Funny People. That movie was a laugh a minute. So, the premise is that Kevin James, who's funny because he's fat, And they make that joke on several occasions. Well, you're fat. He's fat. And unfortunately, there are people who that appeals to. I'll never forget my sister explained the humor of Paul Blart Mall Cop to me as, it's funny because he's fat. This movie takes that basic idea, and that's every Kevin James scene and joke. I think Chris Rock is in it. I forget who else is there. But it's a group of people who were supposedly childhood friends. They meet together because of the death of a coach that they had all had as a kid. And they revert to their childhood ways. They do a bunch of stunts and act like kids. They play a pickup basketball game against some team they had played against in the past. And in general, their side had been way more successful than the other team. So in many ways, it's kind of like bullying and on a class level, where it's a Hollywood big shot in the form of Adam Sandler and then his friends who also had some careers against some dudes who serve soft serve at a fucking diner. And of course, Adam Sandler's the hero of the game, so you can tell who's producing this bullshit. Anyway, most of the jokes are dumb and lazy. Did I mention Kevin James is fat? It's an F. F for fat. Next up is Just Go With It, a 2011 comedy where the only other woman, aside from Drew Barrymore, with whom Adam Sandler can establish some minimal chemistry, Jennifer Aniston, who's a really good actress and can have chemistry with anybody. The two of them are together for the first time, to the best of my knowledge, but not the last time, as we'll see. The setup here is interesting. Adam Sandler plays a pickup artist who's really interested in much younger women. So he's a 30-something, maybe even 40-something pickup artist. And he's interested in a woman whose name I can't recall, but she's pictured in the bikini in the background. And he's trying to pick her up on the basis of selling himself as a sad divorcee. He spots Jennifer Aniston there with her children, and he convinces the younger woman that Jennifer Aniston is his ex-wife, and that he's there kind of doing a vacation, but not really, with his family. He then has to get Jennifer Aniston to go along with his scheme to try to get with this other woman, and then inevitably over the course of time he realizes that he has a lot more in common with a woman his own age than some 20-year-old, and they fall for each other. He becomes a happy family man. The end. The setup is somewhat interesting because it creates some tension, but it's not that clever. And yeah, this one just didn't work for me. I don't buy Adam Sandler as a pickup artist, one. And then two, the idea that him coming off as a gross creep looking for much younger women would appeal to someone with children, and that she would want to bring this man into her home, when she knows that he's into much younger partners. I'm not sold on that being the case. For me, this movie is a little better than the absolute shit, but it's still bad. It's an E. Next up is perhaps Adam Sandler's worst movie ever, Jack and Jill. This movie was made with a fairly large budget, most of which was wasted on Adam's salary and getting Al Pacino to agree to be in it. The only semi-funny part is that Adam Sandler's character, or one of his two characters, is an ad executive who's trying to get Al Pacino to do something for Dunkin' Donuts. And Al Pacino does some sort of musical number about donuts and coffee or some bullshit. And it's actually kind of funny, but everything else in the movie is absolute trash. Adam Sandler is visited by his twin sister, played by himself, named Jill. They have some sibling rivalry. They go to a Lakers game, and I can't remember if it's Al Pacino or if it's somebody else tries to come on to Jill, and they just snipe at each other constantly. Adam Sandler's wife tries to make peace between the twins. The kids are annoying, too, and they make fun of their aunt. There's nothing very funny about it aside from that one sketch with Pacino, which isn't that funny, but it's just kind of the idea behind it is funny. Jack and Jill's an absolute F. And if I had to make a bottom, 10 or 20 movies of all time, Jack and Jill would go on it because there's so few redeeming things about this movie. And it is far and away worse than anything we've talked about or anything that we will talk about, by the way. For me, this is the absolute nadir of American comedy. Not just Adam Sandler movies, but American comedy. This is the absolute drizzling shit of American comedy. Next up is That's My Boy. Adam Sandler in this one is a weird middle-aged man who seems stuck in the 70s. He has a son who's getting married, and he is going to be the best man in a wedding. His son is afraid of being embarrassed by his weirdo dad, and Adam Sandler plays it up as an embarrassing parent. That's the movie. That's it. It's not that funny. It's a different role, I'll give him that. He doesn't do the man-child shit, but it's not much better than that. In some ways, it kind of prefigures Sandy Wexler, where he also plays an annoying, weird, middle-aged dude. But this one is way more over the top. This one, I'm wavering between an E and an F. I'm going to have to go with an F. This one is less funny than Bulletproof or the other one with Jennifer Aniston. Just go with it. Next up is Hotel Transylvania. As I mentioned, not in the kids' movies, but this one has a few decent things going on in it. The animation style, I think, is pretty cool. He actually is passable as sort of a light-hearted Dracula who's not that scary. He's not super recognizable in the role, although if you are familiar with him, you would recognize him. This was not his usual schlock. There's no Rob Schneider wearing a sombrero yelling, "You can do it." So there's always that. I think it's a decent movie, but by no means a great one. For me, it's a C. But again, keep in mind, don't really give a shit about children's movies. There are some people who absolutely love it, some people who think it's shit. I'm somewhere in the middle on that. Next up is the sequel that literally no one asked for, Grown Ups 2. And this one, in 2013, 3 years after the original, for some unknown reason, Adam Sandler's character, who was a high-powered Hollywood executive, decided to move back to his hometown because he'd had such a blast hanging out with his old friends. So he uprooted all his kids and his wife and moved to some podunk town in the middle of nowhere. And apparently that was fine. Maybe he just had fuck-off money and just wanted to do what he wanted to do, and I don't know. They never explain that. They never go into how they afford to do this or if any of them work ever. So, and Adam Sandler and his friends all seem to live like kids, and they all seem to be people who are retired somehow, even though none of them are portrayed as old. They just go around, fucking around, driving school buses, and doing weird stuff. There's a 10-minute or more scene in a Kmart where they go to the food court and they're just hanging out. They also do a lot of weird, over-the-top shit. One of the opening scenes of the movie, there's a moose or caribou or something which breaks into Adam's bedroom and pisses in his mouth. And this one, they just took off they took the basic setup of Grown Ups, where there's this group of friends who live in a small town. They just made the minimal effort to make sure that they got together again by, I guess, having Adam move to the town. All the other people lived there already, and now they can just fuck around and have misadventures. And they just go way over the top. And the other one, at least there's a reason for them being together, and the action ramps up, so there's some logical progression. And this one, it's just pure insanity. And it's an F. Now, I do respect the fact that they don't even try to pretend that there's a point to this movie. In a weird way, I respect that. I almost wanted to give this an honorary E just for doing something completely unexpected. Because normally there's usually a thinly veiled attempt at a plot that they just lose halfway along the way. This time there's no attempt at a plot. It's just, look, we have an established universe, we're just going to rely on that. It wasn't a well-established universe, but fuck it, we don't care. We're going to get the gang back together. We're going to put out a title with a known cast of characters and a known franchise and try to cash in. Next up is another Drew Barrymore Adam Sandler pairing called Blended from 2014. In this one, Adam Sandler manages a sporting goods store. And I forget what Drew Barrymore does, but they meet at a CVS or something, and he has to buy pads for one of his kids, one of his daughters who's having her period. He doesn't know what he's doing, and she kind of helps him. Their interaction becomes a little awkward. They don't quite hit it off. She thinks he's a dick, and he thinks that she's kind of stuck up. So then, for whatever reason, both of them have a vacation at the same time, which ends up being in the same place. A hotel somewhere in South Africa. They go inside of the hotel and then they never leave because it's an all-inclusive resort. You would think if you're going somewhere exotic like South Africa, you'd want to get out of the hotel and see things, but I think they only really leave once. Anyway, they're both there. And normally, Drew Barrymore's character would not look twice at Adam Sandler because he was some dude who always wore tracksuits like he was in the Russian mafia, and he always dressed his kids in tracksuits as well. They bond slowly but steadily, and they also bond because Adam's daughter especially needs sort of a mother figure as she's going through puberty. And they just it's kind of basically the Brady Bunch, but weirder. And it more contrived, if that makes sense. There aren't very many funny scenes. It's pretty lazy. And unlike in 50 First Dates, the chemistry between Sandler and Barrymore doesn't quite do anything here. So for me, this one is also an F. It's pretty bad. And now for what I believe is the last movie that Adam Sandler had, which was theatrically released, Men, Women, and Children from 2014. Basically, this is about the negative influence that social media and the internet can have on families and on personal interaction, and especially on young people. It's not quite Luddite, but it does show that there is sort of a generational gap between parents and kids when it comes to technology, and that it might impede the ability of kids to socialize. It's kind of your general concern trolling film about the youth, which is a premise I've always found obnoxious. That being said, it at least tries to be somewhat intelligent. It takes an actual issue that people talk about, takes a stand, or at least talks about it, explores it some, without being too preachy. For me, it's an E. I can't really justify going higher for a film that does that much moralizing about the internet and the youth today, and all that other happy horse shit. Next up is The Cobbler from 2014, Adam Sandler's first Netflix movie, as far as I'm aware. No, wait, no. The Pixels was the last theatrically released movie, I think. But I think The Cobbler was his first Netflix movie. I could be wrong about that, but pretty sure. Anyhow, in The Cobbler, Adam Sandler's character, his father, I think, is Dustin Hoffman or De Niro. I forget who the fuck it was. It was some well-established actor, though. His father dies, and together they've been running a cobbler store, so they are shoemakers and repairmen. And so of course his character is a little bit depressed. He kind of is low-key. He doesn't react very strongly. This is a very different Adam Sandler character than any other one I've ever seen. He's sort of just a super chill, kind of middle-aged guy, goes about his business, goes to work every day, has no great enthusiasm, but he's also not a complete moron like some of his other characters. And one day he goes into the basement and pulls out an older machine to repair shoes because the one upstairs is broken. And then he realizes that he has magical powers as a cobbler. When he uses that machine on people's shoes, he can then step into their shoes and basically become them. He can start to look just like them. So he experiments with this in many ways and discovers the power of the cobbler. And actually I really like this, and I like the way that it's just a secret that he discovered that his father had never told him about. Well, there's a twist, and it turns out that it was a test, and his father wasn't actually dead because he used the power of the Cobbler to disguise himself as something else. Which kind of, I think, destroys Sandler's character and the journey of exploration that he was on. But anyway, if it hadn't been for that twist that I hated, I would give this movie a B. And a fairly high B at that. I would say that this movie is interesting. And it not only takes an interesting premise, but it also does stuff with it. You actually see him try on different shoes. That creates a little bit of comedy. But also he's able to do some good with it. And he sees the potential without it ever being preachy or going into something that would be beyond the capacity of somebody who's just found this new power and is just some dude who repairs shoes. But because of that twist at the end that I really hate, I gotta give this one a C. Next up is Pixels. This movie is directed by Chris Columbus of Home Alone fame. And I guess Pixels infamy. A lot of people hate this movie. It's about a team of classic gamers led by Adam Sandler. These were the kinds of guys like the people featured in The King of Kong who competed for high scores, and they were brought out of obscurity and nerddom by the government who wanted to fight aliens. For some reason, aliens learned about old school arcade games and sent an invading force in the form of Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and whatever else, so they need old school gamers that have a lot of skill to defeat them. Weird ass premise. Of course, it's supposed to be a big tribute to classical gaming, but it's just lame. And Adam Sandler is not very believable as a gamer. What you really needed to do is get actual gamers. And because some of the ones who appear are either highly eccentric kinds of nerds or they are raging egomaniacal douchebags like Billy Mitchell, who, by the way, has been exposed as a complete and total fraud, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I don't think this movie works on any real level. I gotta give it an F. Fairly high F, but still just shit. Hotel Transylvania 2. This one is basically the same as the first one. It has a theme of acceptance, and this time it's just a normal human being accepted by a bunch of monsters that hang out with Dracula and all the rest. There are a few clever jokes here and there. I guess it's okay. I don't know. It's a kid's movie. It's a C. Ridiculous 6, another Netflix film. This was either the first or second that Adam Sandler made. So, this is a movie where 6 people with obviously different backgrounds turn out to all be sons of one person. There's Luke Wilson, Rob Schneider, and some other washed up people who are paid by Adam Sandler to show up and do humor based around racial stereotypes and shit jokes. There's a scene where a donkey or mule projectile shits. Rob Schneider, once again, is a Mexican stereotype. The jokes aren't really funny. So there are jokes about shit and there are jokes that are shit. It's total shit. I don't know. It's just all shit. It's Ridiculous 6 and it's an F. Another Netflix movie that he did was The Do-Over from 2016. In this film, David Spade is the main character, but Adam Sandler is a major supporting character. So I guess I was wrong earlier when I said that he hasn't done any other supporting roles. Maybe they're co-stars. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I think David Spade is more the protagonist than Adam Sandler. David Spade's kind of a nerdy accountant type guy. He gets in trouble, or he just wants to escape his life for whatever reason. I think he's in trouble. So he turns to a friend who has some sort of special forces connection, and that guy's played by Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler, this was the last movie where he was actually really in shape. So remember I talked about his sort of attempt to become an action star. This was kind of his last attempt. I guess you could say this was the do-over of You Don't Mess with the Zohan. So Adam Sandler's character is this veteran of whatever, special forces or CIA shit, and he helps David Spade's character to establish a new life and protects him and kicks a bunch of ass. And It's kind of goofy fun a little bit. But at the same time, pretty forgettable. I didn't hate it, but at the same time, I was not impressed and wouldn't really recommend it. For me, this is on about the same level as the other movies of the D tier, so that's where I shall put it. Next up is Sandy Wexler from 2017. Some people claim that this movie is a work of genius. I disagree. This movie is mediocre. He does the voice, and if you know exactly what I mean by the voice, plus playing a Jewish stereotype. So it's kind of just two things done in the past combined. Supposedly it's based on some manager, I forget his actual name, his first name is Sandy, but he's got a different last name, who Adam and his friends all knew and made fun of in the 90s, although they kind of secretly like him. So Adam Sandler does like this deliberately weird gait when he walks to make fun of the guy, because the guy's a sort of uncoordinated nerd. And the story is altered from real life because since it's an Adam Sandler movie, women have to be attracted to him for no reason, and a character who is effectively a Whitney Houston knockoff eventually decides to marry him after a series of unsuccessful relationships rather than being with Chris Brown or whoever she ended up with. So yeah, there you go. There's that. Let's see what else happens in the film that's worth mentioning. He lives in the pool cabana of a Persian millionaire who is never there but spies on him all the time. So it's just a perverted character played by Rob Schneider. Except this time he's not Mexican, he's Persian. Dun dun dun! Which is actually pretty surprising and shows a lot of range for Rob Schneider. I guess you could say there is evidence of evolution here. Sandy Wexler is not quite a man-child, but he is kind of gullible and goofy. At one point, there's a skit at the very end where Mike Judge has Beavis and Butthead call him to prank him, and he plays along with it. So there's that. It's kind of an insidery, what would be the word, self-indulgent film about Hollywood by people in Hollywood. So obviously I'm not really the target demo for this. I assume Adam's friends were the target demo for this, or people who are really into Hollywood culture. I'm not one of those people. For me, Sandy Wexler is a D. It's watchable, but it's really just not that good. The Meyerowitz Stories from 2017. This one has Adam Sandler and Ben Stiller as the sons of an emotionally distant father played by Dustin Hoffman. Everybody in this movie acts really well. The dialogue's very realistic, so sometimes there are halting patterns of speech. People don't really say the most eloquent or poignant things at all times. Sometimes people clearly are holding back because of emotionality. So I like that kind of approach to filmmaking sometimes. I mean, not everything should be Tarantino where everybody is witty and on point. Especially if it's a family drama, because family conversations are rarely smooth or interesting. Or, I mean, interesting but not smooth. How about that? There's some tension. It's realistic, like I said, in terms of the speech in the movie. I think it's good. I like the Meyerowitz Stories. I would give it a B. I don't want to spoil too much. It's actually a somewhat quality movie, so one of the better things he's done recently, I would say. Next up is The Week Of, a movie that he did in 2018 alongside of Chris Rock. The two of them are the fathers, respectively, of the bride and groom. I can't remember who's the parent of whom. And they are trying to work together to set up the wedding, but both of them are kind of high-strung and overbearing. And so they're butting heads, and their families are also involved in the chaos. there's some missed opportunities here. They could have made it about racial discomfort since it's a mixed race wedding or something like that. So it could have been a little deeper. They also, and what they do is not really that interesting. Chris Rock's character is, from what I remember, is more high-strung. Adam Sandler is trying to play someone who's more high-strung than he actually is, but he can't. For some reason, he can't pull that off, even though he does it in other movies where he plays a highly neurotic character. But in this case, he doesn't really do it, which I think was what he's going for, but doesn't quite come out. It's one of those where the two parents act like dicks, and their kids have to set them aside and set them straight. Pretty lazy, not that interesting, but I have seen worse from Adam Sandler. For me, the week of is an E. Next up is Murder Mystery. This movie stars Adam Sandler and Jennifer Aniston once again. It came out in 2019. It's really just a paint-by-numbers murder mystery. Kind of like Agatha Christie, but the two main characters are well-known actors. And also, the mystery's not that interesting. There's some comedy. They have a pretty good dynamic. They do seem like a real married couple who have gotten comfortable with one another, and they have some quips at each other's expense, but you can tell that there's still some affection there. So I think in that way, they do a good job, but in terms of the mystery itself, it wasn't terribly interesting. They did face some danger of being framed, and then they do some investigation, and they come across as real, just kind of middle-aged people on vacation who are out of their depth and a part of something bigger than themselves, and really trying to punch above their weight class. I actually think this one's a little underrated. This one's probably a C. I know a lot of people have made fun of his Netflix movie deal, but I think if anything, the quality has remained about the same or maybe even slightly increased since he went to Netflix. Call me crazy. Next up is Uncut Gems from 2019. I have heard people claim that this is by far the best Adam Sandler film, and that this is proof that he actually is a brilliant actor. He does a good job in this movie. He shows gambling addiction in its purest form. This movie is very visceral. It's very interesting. It's very conceptual. I think you could also argue that this movie is fundamentally about a midlife crisis. It's interesting. He's in a broken marriage. His kids don't know about it. He's trying to keep it secret. And he's got a shit ton of gambling debt to what I assume are mafia guys. He bets on basketball games frequently, and because he's a New Yorker who bets on the Knicks from time to time, you can understand why he's in trouble financially. The premise here is that Kevin Garnett visits his shop. He tries to sell him something that he got from Ethiopia, and then he starts to bet on KG because he feels like they have a connection. In the meantime, he's having an affair, and his life is chaotic. This movie goes from scene to scene, and it's very stressful. The way it's shot makes everything tight and constrained. I really respect what this movie's trying to do. And the movie is very smart. And Adam Sandler plays a very convincing character in this. He doesn't seem like Adam Sandler. He does seem like just some jeweler who has a gambling addiction, maybe going through a bit of a midlife crisis, and who knows he's fucking up, but keeps making the same mistakes over and over because he's a flawed person. And just like in real life, there's no great dialogue, there's no great epiphany, he just kind of keeps muddling forward. So I really like all that about it. But I gotta say, this movie is very stressful. Very stressful. And it has realistic dialogue in the sense that conversations involve a lot of people talking over each other. There's a lot of shouting. Man, it's hard to follow in places because of how much is going on, how tight the environments are. And I guess I should mention personal bias. I am somewhat claustrophobic. And I definitely don't like shouting in confined spaces. I'm actually okay with shouting, but there needs to be some space. I need to have some separation. Fuck. This was stressful. Not in a bad way necessarily, but I did feel tired after watching it. Even though it's not a long movie. I'm going to have to go with an A. I really respect this movie, but I do have to say, prepare to be drained by this one if you also suffer from any kind of claustrophobia, or you're not a big fan of just people yelling at each other and being intense for an entire film. It doesn't lose interest, and it's not like one of those action movies, however, where where you lose interest because you kind of get numbed by the action. Last and almost least is Hubie Halloween, his most recent film, also in 2020. Actually, it's the only one in 2020. Uncut Gems is 2019. This movie just came out in time for Halloween, and we watched it right before Halloween, I believe, because I was just curious. It looked dumb, but I wanted to see. So this one is a reversion to form, where Adam Sandler does the classic character, this time a little older. Women are once again inextricably drawn to a strange man-child with a magical thermos. He rides a bike around town trying to warn kids about the evils of acting mean on Halloween. And he's a strange middle-aged man who gets bullied by high school kids, which is weird. I've never seen any town where people bully an adult, at least not high school kids. Even parents who bullied that guy in high school would not allow their kids to do the same. At least I would hope. So that's already sort of unrealistic. The thermos sort of item that he keeps using is really stupid. The mystery involved which involves Steve Buscemi, who sullied himself by being in this, is really dumb. Supporting cast is weak. And there's a murder. I don't know. It just... The thing is, having seen things like Uncut Gems and Reign Over Me, and even some of his better comedies, such as Eight Crazy Nights, Billy Madison, what have you, Adam Sandler can act and he can be funny. And Hubie Halloween is just a complete and total waste of his time and talent. So that's what I find really frustrating about Adam Sandler, is that he's someone who's capable of doing good things and he chooses not to. And I think that's what most people feel in regard to him, is that he just wastes what talent he does have on shit. And Hubie Halloween, make no mistake about it, is shit. This is easily one of the new bottom 5 for Adam Sandler. It's not as bad as, in my opinion at least, it's not as bad as Jack and Jill, not as bad as Little Nikki, but it might actually be a little worse than going Overboard because there's no excuse for it. Adam Sandler can make whatever he wants at this point in his life. He's wealthy. He owns a film company. He has a Netflix contract. They will stream whatever bullshit he puts out because he has a loyal fan base of people who will watch anything that he does and gobble it up no matter how terrible it is. So anyway, these are my rankings of Adam Sandler's films. Do you agree or are you wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Peace out, and I will be back in the future to talk about Master System games. That video will be about Master System games which were mostly designed to be Genesis games, so we're going to be looking at sort of the 8-bit versions of games which were mostly 16-bit games. So, until next time.